Hello everyone and welcome to the 2018 World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. For those of you who are perhaps new to this channel or perhaps new to this match, this is game number 9 as we already mentioned. The first 8 games have ended in a draw, so the result so far is 4-4. But you know, all these draws, it's not unheard of. Like if you go really back to a match between Lasker and Schlechter, out of the first 10 games that were played, only 2 were decisive. If you go back to 1978 to when Karpov played Korchnoi, out of the first 10 games, only 1 was decisive. In the Carlsen-Karjakin match in 2016, out of the 12 games, only 2 were decisive. So it's I don't know, it's not really that the engines are creating all of these draws. It's just that it's a World Chess Championship match. Obviously, the two people competing are almost equally strong. You know, it's hard to say. You have to go now through the regulations as they are. 12 games of classical chess, then go into rapids, then go into blitz, then into Armageddon and whatnot. But it's not really nothing new. So it's very interesting to see what happens in game 9 as Carlsen has the white pieces for the 5th time, and he prepared something that was not yet played in this match. Before we check out the actual game, we do have a couple of nice photos by Niki Riga, and for those of you who perhaps do not follow chess in the media so much or on social networks, here we have a very nice photo of another diagonal handshake, and as you can see, there's not a lot of eye contact going on either. Carlsen arrives at the scene, and as you can see, he has an eye patch. It's not really an eye patch, but a little plaster over the eye. Here we have a nicer photo, also compliments of Niki Riga. If you're still not following her, I will put a couple of links to her social media in the description below. You can check out some of her more work for more excellent photos. But there you can see on his rest day, Carlsen had an accident. He was playing football, and he not his teammate, but a player from the opposing team, they collided with heads. The player on the opposing team was a reporter for VGTV, for Norwegian television, and he also has an injury such as this one. And it's you know, also an interesting thing to discuss whether it's wise to play such aggressive sport, you know, on your rest day, as it can seriously interfere with the match. But Carlsen thinks it's okay, and you know, he arrives at the game wearing this, well, not an eye patch. And also here we have a very nice close-up of Fabiano. As you can see, he's not at all injured, very focused and very prepared for the game. I didn't really center it all that great. There you go. All right. Now that we've checked out the photos and we've discussed a little bit before this game, let's see how game 9 went. Carlsen with the white pieces opens with c4, and we've already seen this. We will see the same variation that was played in game 4 of the 2018 Carlsen versus Caruana match, but with a slightly different preparation from Carlsen. And you will see in this game, Carlsen really came prepared. So knight to c3, we have the English opening on the board, knight to f6, knight f3, knight to c6, the 4 knights variation of the English, g3, and now d5, the exact same line that was played in game 4. We have pawn captures, knight captures, and now bishop to g2. We have bishop to c5, and now comes castles. Fabi castles, like in game 4. We have d3, rook to e8, and here we already discussed this during our showing of game 4. Here bishop to d2 was played by Carlsen, but also bishop to d2 is a move Wesley So already played against Caruana in 2018 in the Grand Chess Tour's Blitz tournament in Paris, but here Carlsen prepares bishop to g5. And okay, Caruana did come prepared for this move, but he also pretty much instantly blitzed out knight captures on c3. We have b captures on c3, just to show you can't trade queens here, because you will just be down a piece. After bishop captures, knight captures, you will get this bishop out of the way, and then after knight captures on b2, if you just quickly count the pieces, you can see that black has 4 pieces, and that white has, we'll use this nice blue color, sorry about that, actually 3 minor pieces, so basically just losing a piece. But after knight captures on c3, b captures on c3, and now comes f6, simply kicking the bishop back. Here Carlsen plays bishop to c1, and Caruana mentioned in the press conference after the game that he didn't, the bishop to c1 doesn't come as a surprise to him. Of course, he did not expect bishop to d2, as you want to leave this square open for the knight. The knight might be interested in a maneuver such as knight d2, knight b3, going after the bishop, and then a4, a5. And he replied bishop to e6 relatively quickly, but here Carlsen again blitzed out this bishop to b2 move, and this is the first time in the game that Caruana started to think, and it took him some 9 minutes to figure out what's going on here. He said that he might have already encountered this move, but that he just couldn't recollect his memories about seeing it. And okay, bishop back to b6. You do want to play this move at some point either way. It's just undefended on c5, making it a target. Either the knight can attack it, or the b file is also half open, so at some point you will be able to perhaps attack the b file using your rook. But here immediately bishop to b6. And okay, we have d4 by Carlsen, and again Caruana had to spend some time here to figure out what the best reply is. If you go into an exchange here, doesn't really change all that much, but after captures and bishop to d5, a very important move that you definitely want to include to counter white's strong bishop. White will simply go e3, and the white's position will be excellent. The bishop will be kind of silly here, attacking this very strong d4 pawn. You will then have to figure out a play how to move your knight somewhere, push c5 to at least try and attack white's center. But here, as Giri so nicely put it, you don't want to trade in the center, as basically you don't want to release the tension in the center without gaining anything. It's one of the general principles in chess, but as Giri mentions, you don't want to release the tension in the center as it's a sign of weakness, but as a sign of weakness of character. So Caruana plays bishop to d5 immediately without doing anything about this central tension. Here queen to c2 by Carlsen. Also, you do have to play something, of course. If you try something like e4 here instead after queen to c2, it's definitely a move, but white will simply move the knight d2, which it probably want to go there anywhere, or knight to h4, and then you're not going to be able to do any damage in the center, and now this bishop on b6 will really look ugly. So instead we have e captures on d4 finally by Caruana, c captures on d4, and now comes bishop to e4. If you go into an exchange immediately, for example bishop captures on f3, then you get bishop captures on f3, knight captures on d4, bishop captures, and now queen captures on d4. Bishop captures on b7, and now after the rook moves, rook a to b8, you will be able to bring the bishop back, and now you will at some point want to play king g2, most likely get rid of the queen with e3, and Giri also mentioned this, that he would then go h4, h5, and now the f6 pawn will really be a problem, as you will simply try to create more weaknesses, and that it will be very hard for black to do anything. So bishop to e4. Carlsen moves the queen. We have queen to b3 check, attacking the king. If king to h8, then simply e3 will be fine for white, but Caruana goes back, bishop to d3. And now, as Lawrence Trent so conveniently teased the Giri in the live stream, it's possible that white will go back queen c2, and then we will have a repetition by perpetual check here, bishop e4, queen b3, bishop to d5, where players will agree to a draw. But of course it would be a terrible shame if anything like this happened. So after bishop to d5, Carlsen saw that of course he cannot go back to c2. He went queen to d1. And as Caruana also mentioned in the press conference, he said that most likely after this queen to d1 move, even Carlsen was now not swimming in the safe waters of preparation anymore. So okay, bishop captures on f3, and this move really came as a surprise to a lot of people, as it's a very committal move which will simply leave black worse for the rest of the game. And basically what everyone said, that Carlsen will get the exact position that he really wants to play, where he will have a slight edge, and there really won't be any weaknesses in his position, so he can just play it out for as long as he wants. So here you could capture it immediately with bishop captures on f3, which would pretty much bring us to the same idea that happened in the game. First, Carlsen played queen to b3 check. Now, of course, you can't block with the bishop because the other bishop will simply capture it. If you block, then bishop captures, and then white can even consider doubling black's pawn structure here. So we have queen b3 check, Caruana moved the king to h8, and now comes bishop captures on f3. Knight captures on d4, we have bishop captures, queen captures, of course not bishop captures. If you capture with the bishop, then rook 8 to d1 will simply trap it. You don't have time to get rid of it, as the queen is on d8, e3 is coming, and you will simply lose a piece here. So after bishop captures on d4, we have queen captures on d4, and now comes e3, attacking the queen here. And now comes queen to e5. Queen to e5, the most likely the best square for the queen. If you go queen to c5, then white has a lot more options. For example, bishop captures on b7. It's a move that would be played in pretty much every line, regardless of where the black queen goes. But here, after rook to b8, you will have perhaps an idea of going something like queen to a4. Now, of course, you cannot capture the bishop because queen captures rook is a possibility, and then black will have to waste one more move to kick the queen away, but then even queen to c6 is a possibility. And now your queen isn't really all that impressive here on a5. But basically, by playing queen to e5, it's the best central square for the queen always. You know, if not proven otherwise, a central square is the best square for the queen. Also, the queen keeps an eye on this rook, so there won't be any funny business going on the queen side. Bishop captures on b7 as planned, and now rook 8 to d8. There's no point in going rook 8 rook here, even if you are saying that, okay, if the bishop moves, my rook will be x-raying the queen, but after bishop to g2, there's really no way to take advantage of this. There's no good discovery on the queen. You can't even capture on e3. Well, the queen will simply capture the bishop, and you will lose a bishop here. So after bishop captures on b7, rook 8 to d8, immediately Caruana introduces this rook now into the game via the central file. Rook 8 to d1, countering the rook, and now queen back to e7 by Caruana, keeping an eye on this rook. If an exchange happens, then the other rook can come there as well. And also, if Carlsen starts pushing the h-pawn, which is definitely an idea, at some point Carlsen wants to play bishop to f3 and starts pushing the pawn. Caruana wants to play f5 and have this queen controlling the h4 square, which we will see in the game. Carlsen does go h4, and here in an interview, Carlsen called this decision, this h4 move, a ridiculous idea, and he thought that he most likely had better ideas like bishop to c6, or maybe simply improving with king to g2, either just making improving the position before making such a committal move with h4, because at some point, if the h file even opens up, you do want to bring your rook over to h1, so it would definitely help to have a king on g2. But he immediately started with h4, and here, after some consideration, Caruana plays g6. If you go into exchanges immediately with rook captures and captures, rook d8, and you go into even more exchanges, then queen to f7 will be an extremely troublesome move. You can't really push the queen away. If you attack it, the queen will go to d7, and now the queen and bishop will be very strong. The bishop is coming to d5 to attack the queen, and now after the queen moves, bishop will still come to d5, and after g6 you will even be able to push h5, and it will be a very unpleasant position for black. For example, c5, and now even h6 is possible, where of course you will never be able to capture it because you will simply get checkmated after queen e8 check. But even better, simply bishop to e4 with a double attack here, and then it will be like even if you push f5, then this comes with the threat of mate. White is definitely making some progress. But Caruana doesn't go into anything like that. After h4, he pushes g6, and here Carlsen decided to push h5, which is an extremely committal move, but it's not to be unexpected. If he prepared it with something like queen to c4 or any other move, Caruana would most likely simply play h5, prepare f5, and then this structure would be unbreakable for white. Or if he tried something else, if he tried here an idea like king g2 to perhaps create some room for this rook to come use the soon to be open h file, then we could see a king g7, h5, and now rook captures on d1. Rook captures, rook d8, And now even if you tried to take advantage of the h-file, now rook to d2 comes as a bit of a problem, because now your f-pawn is pinned. Ideas like queen captures or bishop captures on e3 become possible, and again it's a very unpleasant position for even white. So you can't really allow such things in a World Chess Championship match. If after g6, Carlsen pushes h5 immediately, and here your instincts are telling you to not capture on h5, but it's actually the best move here, and Caruana does play it. He plays g captures on h5, and now you have problems. Caruana has plans of playing f5 and h4. He wants to open up the g file, use the g file for his rooks, and attack Carlsen's king as well. So although white is still slightly better, as the dark square bishop on b6 is, well, one of the most useless pieces ever, unless at some point this bishop returns to f3, then perhaps ideas like bishop captures on e3 will be possible, but that's a different story. Here Carlsen plays queen to c4. He doesn't want to allow this pawn to come to h4. We have f5. Now the queen is also guarding h4, one of the reasons Caruana played this queen back to e7 a few moves back. And here again, if you go into something like king g2, then h4 is coming, and after rook to h1, you can either even play h captures on g3, and the semi-open h file will not do all that much for you. After queen c3 check, queen g7 blocking, you can even capture here, and after king captures on g3, captures, it will be simply a pawn down for white, and with nothing to show for it. Okay, you will claim some activity with rook to d7 perhaps, but nothing serious. So after f5, we have bishop to f3 by Carlsen, and now comes h4. Caruana is definitely putting up a very active defense, and even though at this point Caruana was, I believe, more than an hour down on the clock, still his position seems to be improving step by step. Perhaps by Carlsen pushing that h4 h5 too soon, but it's I mean it's hard to say. Rook captures on d8 was played, rook captures on d8, and now g captures on h4, simply capturing that pawn. And here after this we have rook to g8 check, or you could do something like queen captures on h4 instead of g captures, but then you go into a queen trade, and after queen captures, g captures, even f4 is sufficient for a draw, as the bishops are of opposite color. After you capture, you can go rook here. You're definitely going to win back the pawn, either the f pawn or the h pawn. So after rook here, rook captures, and you will not even be able to move the bishop because of this very nice pressure against the f2 pawn. So black will even be better here. So like we said, g captures on h4 was played, and now comes rook to g8 check. King to h1 by Carlsen, and now queen to f6. Here, Carlsen went for queen to f4, and now comes bishop to c5. Wanting to bring that bishop over to d6 to dislodge the white queen, and also perhaps create some very nice attacking chances himself. We have rook to g1. Carlsen now has to exchange rooks. Rook captures, king captures, and now comes bishop to d6. You don't have time for something like queen to a1 check. This would be very reckless, king g2 and capturing a pawn, as queen e5 check, king moves, and now of course you don't even capture the bishop, but bishop d5 check picks up the queen from a2. So of course definitely not the time to be picking up pawns. We have bishop to d6, and now comes queen to a4. We have f4, and now comes queen captures on a7. Also, perhaps you could push e4, and yes, you have created a passed pawn, which will most likely never be pushed, but then even queen captures on h4 is possible. And after something like queen to d4 check, king moves, queen captures on a7, queen g5 check comes, and now it will be a forced draw after queen to b5, because you have to go back to g1. There's no way for you to come to all the way here, because now you get a bishop to b4 check, and you're going to get mated. Queen d3 check, king moves, and now it's simply a very easy checkmating pattern. So after f4, we have the immediate queen captures on a7 by Carlsen. We have f captures on e3. And queen captures back on e3. So here Carlsen is up a pawn, but not for long. It seems quite dangerous for Caruana to actually capture this pawn because of some queen d8 checks, but he calculates precisely, and there are in fact no dangers here. unfortunately for Carlsen. He captures on h4, and now comes a4. Carlsen starts pushing his pass pawn, but even if, like we said, he did something like queen d8 check, you can always simply move the king. King g7, queen d7, and now you can even block with the queen, but you can also just play the king back to h8 and claim that white still has nothing. So Carlsen plays a4, and it's like we already mentioned, this is move 37. Caruana is low on time. He still has to make 3 more moves to reach time control. Although he could capture the pawn, he does not capture this pawn, because if you capture this pawn, if you play queen captures, then you have to calculate. Okay, now you do protect this square, but then you allow queen c3 check, and then you have to go into what happens if king g8. Then I get bishop d5 check. King goes here, queen to h8 check. King e7, queen captures on h7, and then where do I go? Am I safe? Of course, you can escape going back, but you know, it's calculation that's not needed if you're very low on time. But here, just to show, there are even dangers of you getting checkmated. So you can go here, and then after something like queen e6 check, king moves, or you can go here and then lose the queen after this. But most likely after spotting such variations, check. And here now the pawn and bishop create a very nice wall against the black king, so now you are definitely getting checkmated. Bishop f3 check, king moves, and now after queen check this will be checkmate. So after a4, Caruana doesn't want to needlessly calculate moves, so simply queen back to f6, controlling this very important diagonal, so there are no tricky moves here by Carlsen. We have bishop to d1, queen to e5, offering a queen trade, and there's really nothing better to do. You can only now become worse if you allow queen to h2 check. Carlsen decides to exchange queens. Queen captures, bishop captures, and now a5. Carlsen makes move 40. This is time control, and with g7, Caruana also makes move 40. So 2 pawns each, bishops of opposite color. They did play it out for a little bit. A6, but now Caruana, of course, controls the dark square diagonal. We have king g2, king to f6, and now bishop and now f4, controlling the king here. Bishop to b6, but it doesn't. It's not a problem if you run into this check or anything. You will simply pick up this pawn for this pawn, which is perfectly fine. So after f4, bishop to b6, we have king f3, h6 now, and now king to e4. We have bishop goes back, we have bishop to g4, and now bishop to g1, simply controlling this very important g1 a7 diagonal. King d5, bishop back to b6, we have king c6, bishop goes back, king b7, or you can capture on c7, but it really doesn't make a difference. Here black can draw in various ways. He can simply capture here with check, and then after you move back, still control this very important diagonal. You can even give up the bishop here, and of course you no longer have any pawns, so you cannot win the game. Or even in a funnier way, you can give up this pawn and it will be over just as well. Bishop captures, now comes king to f5, you will pick up this pawn as it's on a dark square, and after you pick it up again, you will have this king against the king and bishop, which is of course a draw by insufficient material. So after bishop to e3, king to b7 was played, and now we have bishop back to b6. Bishop h3. Carlsen is controlling f5, and this pawn is controlling e5 and g5. So there is a wall that the black king can never cross, and Carlsen was hoping that at some point perhaps h5 would be played, and then he could maybe somehow outmaneuver the black king. Well, obviously not this way, but maybe this way, and then use the bishop to push the black king away. But such things are highly improbable. Bishop to e3, attacking the pawn, but now simply king moves back. Bishop back to b6. Of course, you don't want to allow something like bishop captures and then a7. Then, of course, you can no longer prevent the queening of this pawn with anything. So after king c6, we have bishop back to b6. Not really much of a task. Caruana can simply just keep pushing the bishop back and forth. King d5, bishop to a7, king e4, bishop to b6, bishop to f1, king e6, bishop to c4 check, king moves back, bishop to d3, king e6, and it was in this position that the players agreed to a draw. This is move 56. So another draw well used by Carlsen, although it simply was not yet enough. I'm very interested. What do you think? Because it's a very well-known fact that Caruana trains a lot of yoga, so perhaps it really helps him with his nerves during such a huge event like the World Chess Championship match. This is already game 9, where you're constantly playing, and everything in the chess world, the entire chess world, is basically watching your games. So I don't know. Seems like yoga and chess could really go well together. And also, they asked Caruana after the game in the press conference, is he also of a similar mind that if 3 more games are drawn, that Carlsen is the huge favorite in the tiebreaks. But Caruana actually said that he does not agree with everyone there, that he considers his chances, not to be such poor that everyone describes them. So yeah, basically that's game 9. I do hope you enjoyed it. Really, a lot of fireworks possible that never happened. I would like to thank Lemo Muro, Alberto Anesi, Max Kavin, Tony Mo at guitar, and Brentford Pilech for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content. And if you have any interesting content you would like to suggest, always use hashtag suggestion, and when I have the time, I will always check out your suggestions. Thank you all, and I will see you soon.